Hey everybody, I'm going to try to make this quick. I figure if I make them short, then I'll have more motivation to make these. Um, I'm going to do a quick overview of some tips to keep combat flowing, because what I've found is combat can really drag, especially if you're playing with new players who are still learning the system. Their turns are going to take longer, and if you're playing with a new DM as they're trying to juggle everything, it's going to slow down as well. So, as the DM, it's important for you to keep things flowing as much as possible. Um, an important aspect of this is keeping track of initiative. It can get really bogged down if you're just sitting there going, okay, whose turn is it? It's this person's turn, okay. And then, oh, okay, whose turn is it? It's important to have, a list close at hand. One good tip that's in the Dungeon Master's Guide is to have index cards numbered, and you hand out the number, and then you just go, okay, it's 1, now 2, now 3, and the person with that card can go, okay, I'm number 3, it's my turn. Um, so yeah, anything you can do to just keep that flowing will make your life a whole lot easier. Um, Tracking health is another thing, and this is something that can actually be offloaded to the players. Usually you're going to have at least one player at the table who keeps track of monster health anyway, or not health, but damage. And if you just say, okay, if you keep track of damage, that's one less thing the dungeon master has to do. And they're going to do it anyway. You don't really need two people doing it, so you might as well let them do it. Um, that'll make your job a lot easier, as long as you're in a place where you can see their paper, where how much health is taken. Otherwise, you're going to have to be asking all the time, okay, how much damage does this one have? How much damage does the dragon have? How much damage does this ogre have? So if you position yourself in a place where you can see their damage tracking, it can save you a lot of work, save you a lot of headaches. Um, oh, this kind of goes back to keeping things flowing smoothly. Uh, you need to know what your monster is going to do prior to the turn, especially if you're using a lot of low-level creatures like a goblin, a bunch of goblins, a bunch of kobolds, something like that. You don't need to spend 3 minutes thinking about what this random goblin's going to do. Have them take their attack, have them hide, whatever they're going to do. And this goes back to a bit about preparation time. Whenever you're planning an encounter, think about the tactics that you want that specific monster to use. Excuse me a second. If you think about your tactics beforehand, whenever you're actually sitting there at the table, you're going to have a lot less thinking to do. And whenever you're a player and you're running one character, it's okay to take more time to think, because you only got that one character to do. But whenever you're the dungeon master and you got 5, 6, 7, maybe more, depending on what you're doing, creatures on the table, and if you're tactically thinking every single turn for each and every one of them, your players are going to hate you for one, and for two, your combats are going to take 30 minutes for low-level creatures. And for these random fights that aren't important, you don't want them to take forever, because then you don't have time to do the important stuff. And this is especially true if you're going through a dungeon. There's going to be lots of different encounters in the dungeon. Some of them obviously aren't combat, they're going to be traps. You might meet another adventurer in there, have some social encounters. But you're going to have quite a few encounters even in a medium-sized dungeon. You don't want at each and every encounter to take 30 minutes to an hour, depending on size. You want the most of the time to be saved for the big boss at the end of the dungeon. The whole point of those little encounters in between is to wear down your player's resources so that they have an actual challenge whenever they get to the end. Let's see, what else about combat? This is really more of a style thing, but start thinking about if you want to use theater of the mind, just describe everything, or if you want to use a battle mat, have this battle mat here and place down minis. I know I use Lego figures as my minis because I got a ton of them. But a couple tips for each one. With theater of the mind, you need to take quite a bit of extra time to describe everything around your players. And it needs to be clear. Your players are going to be, some of them at least, not everybody cares about tactics, but some of your players are going to be thinking tactically, and they're going to want to know what the environment around them entails, so that they can use that to their advantage, or so that the monsters don't use it to their advantage. If they know that there's this big, there's something big in the environment, big trees, or they're on a city street and there's a lot of corners and alleyways, your players aren't going to want to be surprised by some random monsters popping out. Especially, they're really not going to like it if you didn't tell them about the corner. They're relying on you, on your descriptions, whenever it's theater of the mind. And if you're using a battle mat, however you're making a battle map, whether you're drawing it or whether you're using little dice to symbolize different things, you're going to want to lay out what the room looks like. If there's a table, that table needs to be on the battle mat. If there's, if there's like a cliff, if they're fighting on a cliff, they're going to want to know the barriers of that cliff. Anything that the character would see, you need to make sure that your players at least know about it. Nothing's worse than being caught off guard by something that's been there the entire time that you had no idea was there because it wasn't described to you. And one more quick thing that I wanted to talk about, probably in the right place to talk about it. I already talked a little bit about tactics, but it kind of fits now that we're talking about the battle maps. The reason that you put something on a battle map is because you want your players to be able to use it. But it's also available to your monsters. So whenever you're planning an encounter, think about, look at the intelligence of the creature that you're using and see how much of the environment they would actually use. If they're fighting druids who are using beasts as minions or whatever you'd want to call them at that point. Tigers are quite stealthy, so you might want to have tall grass that they can hide in. Maybe you have something a bit more intelligent, like a hobgoblin leading a troop of goblins. Hobgoblins are quite tactical in nature. They might be able to order their goblins into more sophisticated tactics than what you would otherwise see. So I know I mentioned a table earlier. Maybe a group of kobolds who tend to be quite clever and cowardly flip over a table and use it as cover. And it's very important that your monsters use tactics like this. Your players aren't necessarily going to know what kind of tactics you're expecting from them or how you're expecting them to use the environment if your monsters never do it. So maybe in a low-level encounter against kobolds, the kobolds use a flipped-over table as cover to great success. Then later on, in a harder encounter, maybe you put another table in that room so your players can go, oh, we're in trouble. I remember the kobolds using this tactic. I'm going to flip this table and use it as cover. So that's one thing to think about. kind of, it's a good idea to repeat hazards and environmental factors. Use them with low-level monsters to showcase how they can be used effectively. And then your players will know in the future, oh, I can use this. This also cuts down on the amount of work that you have to do, because rather than making every single battle map unique, you can have a couple different factors. You can rotate, 8 factors, and on each map you put 3. So that's one way you can start designing battle maps. But definitely don't leave it at like blank rooms. Not only is it boring, every single fight will feel exactly the same, where you just run up to the enemy and hit them with your sword. But it also gives tactical advantages to those players who are willing to use it. I think that's all I want to talk about for combat. If I left anything out that you're curious about, let me know and I can address it. I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about next or when I'll talk about next. But hopefully it's less time than between this one and the previous. I haven't DM'd in quite some time, so I'm working mostly on memory rather than experience right now. So hopefully I can get some games under my belt at some point and remember what I'm doing. I just went with combat because that's my most proficient aspect of the game. There are 3 pillars, obviously. There's exploration, combat, and social interaction. So perhaps social interaction and exploration will be the next topics I cover. Yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.
Pokemon Go, you are a failure in my book. Maybe it's because I can't